Folks, howdy. Dev here. Yet again for update number, 700. How you doing? Sunday. On one hand, I feel like this week I had so many things that I wanted to mention in the update. And as is often the case when you're finally on the spot, you sort of forget. I think the main thing that I've been thinking is it's been about 3 years of just constant upheaval. More than that if you include the pandemic, etc. And it all kind of came to a head during the Power Nerd thing, and on the eve of me now starting the Moth and getting all this sort of in line. It's given me a sort of pause for thought. I guess a big part of it is it's almost like an adrenaline withdrawal. I don't know if that's an actual thing, or like a type of crisis fatigue. But when you are constantly running in the red for so long, you get used to that. And then in absence of that, you just crash. And as soon as I delivered Power Nerd, which I'll talk about in a moment, I crashed so hard, man. Holy cow. Past couple of weeks have been this constant arm wrestle with my mind. Not in a way that is irreparable. It's just, you can't be rolling for as long as I had been, and then once it stops, just be like, and we're fine. It's just, the fallout of it was a combination of apathy and existential dread, and but as I've said before about all these records, that's part of the process. So for those of you who are making records or projects, I can assure you that if you've put a ton of effort into it, by the time it's over, you will probably have a couple of week period where everything is just on its head. That being said, I've had opportunities since finishing to reflect on it. When it first started, the whole idea of that project was meant to be, in my mind's eye, I was like, well, I've got one more of these. That's how it felt. I've got one more record that is similar to what I've done in the past. Because I feel like I'm on the verge of like a fundamental shift creatively. And what typically happens when I write is I write a ton of things and then just kind of put it into categories. I'll say, okay, this song goes with the Moth, this one goes with any number of projects, and because I have been writing that style for so long, it was starting to become clear to me over the past year that I had a dozen or so songs that are like a throwback to things that I had done in the past. And I guess I went into it thinking, well, I want it to be like a celebration in a sense. Not only for myself, because I like that, but for also the audience that has been so tolerant of the things that I've been experimenting with over the past few years, that to sort of give one that is like easier and more straightforward. It's like things have been so complicated in the world at large that prior to moving into this next phase, and let alone the Moth and all these things, I wanted to kind of have something that was a bit more like, thanks for the attention, thanks for the patience. Here's something with big choruses and a good beat, and we can just, it's like a party in a sense. And what I found was, by doing this, the amount of unprocessed emotions that I had, whether or not it was grandparents passing away, or kids leaving home, or friends dying, or any of these things that over the past decade or so, I don't know if you're guilty of this as well, but I tend to suppress those emotions, I think. And for practical reasons. There's, I'm the person in the family that has to sort of, the breadwinner, or I've got to be there for the family, I've got to be there for friends. So like probably a lot of you end up having these experiences, but you don't essentially process them. They just get kind of suppressed, and then I think a lot of the reason why I've been reticent in the past to feel things in a way was just there's a internal sense that I'm thinking, oh God, as soon as that crack appears in the dam, then the water is just going to be pushing through, and before you know it, it's going to be too much. It's all going to come out, and with all the things that life has asked of us over the past little while, of course, it's just you got to stay balanced, you got to stay solid, and so what started as a party record ended up being a vehicle for an emotional release, I think, for me, that number one I didn't expect, and number two, the practicalities of trying to make a record in a new studio, trying to figure out the sound on deadlines and all this sort of stuff while you're emotionally that raw was funny from the outside. I mean, at the time, I don't, I never really cry. Like, it's never really been something for me. I used to think there was something really wrong with me because when there were things that warranted tears in the past, I would just, nothing. But again, once that crack appeared, it just was like this repressed 20 years, maybe more, of emotions, just like, and I couldn't stop it. And it was hand in hand with this record that was meant to be an appetizer, a part of an analogy that the Moth trilogy of these 3 records, Moth, Axolotl, Power Nerd, it was meant to be this kind of a mission statement for it that was, again, sort of a celebration of where I've been prior to where I feel like I will be going in the future, and I wanted to say thanks by making a record that was a little more straightforward, but it just, the emotional components of life just ended up adhering themselves to this simple rock vehicle. And on the last records, on Lightwork in particular, I remember a couple years back, a lot of people in my professional world were like trying to help, I know, by saying, listen man, you should really be careful when you're doing social media, when you're doing YouTube or whatever, that you're not divulging too much about yourself and your process, and because that's not what people typically want to hear. And I remember being confused by that. I'm thinking, if I feel something, or if I have an observation on a record of mine or a part of my process, I want to be able to say, hey, this is where I was at, this is why this happened, this is what this is about. And the reason for that is not because I think that what I do is of such importance that it needs to be spoken about. It's just, that's what I do. That's my, I hesitate to use the word art because it always sounds so pretentious, but my artistic output involves the analysis of it. It's always been a big part of it. I can see where I'm going by getting a sense of where I've been, right? But at the same time, if my assessment of a recent work is on the surface, it seems like it's negative. I remember when Lightwork came out, I was so not screwed up. I was so overwrought by the move and the renovation and building and the pandemic and the lockdown and working with a producer for the first time that when I was releasing that record, my assessment of it publicly was not what bands usually do. You probably notice it when a band or an artist releases their new record, the rhetoric is often the same. It's like, oh, this is the heaviest thing we've ever done. This is, a throwback to the records from in the past, and just all that sort of schmaltzy shit that goes into trying to promote things. And my promotion for light work was like, I almost hated it, but I fixed it, and I don't hate it now. Which I think from a PR point of view is not ideal, because of course I love it and I did my best at it, but the point I guess I'm trying to make is like I always want to be honest about where I'm at. And so I came off social media, which was healthy, by the way, even though these stupid phones are still just as much of an addiction as any hard drug, I would say. I wanted to at least play ball and just be like, listen, if I am sabotaging the work that goes into this, not only from my side but from everybody else's, then maybe I should step back. And then when I started doing the updates here, the objective was to use it as an opportunity to sort of give a play-by-play of the mental states that go into creating these things. And again, I'll reiterate, it's not because I think that the mental states are important or even valuable. It's just as an observation. This is how it works. This is what I've been doing since the beginning. It's like indicative of arrogance or narcissism, maybe from some vantage point. But for me, it's just, I just have always thought I was really dumb. I wish I knew what was going on. I wish I had the foresight to be able to say, oh, if you do this, that's going to be the end result. But the way that it works for me is I have to take things until they're fully formed and then sit back with it and look at it. And then I can say, oh, I see what it is now. Oh, I see how this works for me. Oh, and I see what the end result of that is in the long run. And I'm just not the type of mind that can see it in advance. I just have to do it. Remember when I was younger, it was like, well, maybe I need to be seen by people, so I put myself in a position to be seen. And I was like, oh, I don't know if that's it. And I was like, well, maybe I need to, really work and try and get a bunch of stuff. And I got a bunch of stuff, and I was like, well, this is a pain in the ass too. And then I was like, well, maybe I need to build a studio, and I do that, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. It's like the writing's on the wall that. Regardless, my point that I'm trying to make is the analysis of the work for me is just because I feel I'm too slow to see what's going on in my life without that analysis. So how does this play into Power Nerd? Prior to me starting Moth, prior to me, starting this, to get the Ruby Quaker episodes out, 12 of them, by the way. It's really cool. Okay, so if I sabotaged some of the past records with honesty, how do I feel about Power Nerd? Okay, well, let's see. It's one of the most important things I've ever done. Is it the best thing I've ever done? Well, I mean, is it reinventing the wheel? I mean, so why is it one of the most important things you've done? I'm not sure. It just... Not only did I go to my way to make something that I think people, friends of mine, myself, would not have to really work hard with, in a sense. Like, Puzzle was a lot of work, Deconstruction was a lot of work, Empath was a lot of work. So I wrote a bunch of choruses and short songs thinking that I was like, it's going to be great. It's a party record. And I think if that's how it had turned out, just a party record, I wouldn't feel what I feel about it. I think if it had turned out to be a party record that somebody else mixed and I had the original group of people playing on it that had committed to it in the beginning or whatever, or agreed to it at least, I don't know if it would be as important to me as what it is. It was a new studio. I couldn't figure out how to make the studio work. I was just emotionally so fucked up during it, just, and not because I'm emotionally fucked up. It's just, it can't just be me that has had this happen there, or that when all it takes for years of repressed emotions to just come flooding out at any impetus, it just took one thing, like the straw that broke the camel's back, and then all of a sudden there's just this sense of like, all right, now we're gonna have to deal with this. And I think the thing that broke the camel's back was my flippant disregard for the changes that have clearly occurred in my psychology, both creatively and personally. When I agreed to do the record at first, there was people in my professional world saying, well, it'd be nice to have a record out this year. It'd be cool before you do the Moth, because the Moth is crazy shit and Axolotl's crazy shit. If you had, as you had mentioned, which I did, like a half dozen or a dozen or so of these more, songs that are things like you have done in the past, it'd be cool, just get her done. And my flippancy was me saying, oh yeah, no problem, man. I got this. I'm gonna finish writing it in 10 days, and I'll just do it in a month and a half, no problem. If I have someone mix it and I have other people play it, no problem. But just one thing after another, it was like problem. The people that were gonna do it were no longer doing it. The people who were mixing it, no longer mixing it. You know what I mean? Like, your personal life just kind of explodes, and you gotta move again. Just after getting this set up again. But the last week has been really difficult psychologically, just because, another example, I just don't know where I'm at. I mean, I know who I am, but I also recognize the ways in which the industry has evolved. And so much of that is you have to book things 2 years in advance, so you never have a chance to stop. You never have a chance to just stop. And I mean, a couple of months won't do it. You know what I mean? It's not even a year. Like, I mean, stop. Who knows how long? Maybe if I stopped, it would only take 2 weeks. Or it might take 20 years. I don't know. But because I haven't done that, and because the amount of things that have happened over the past 5 years have been unprocessed, let alone all the other stuff from all the years prior. I was so close to all 4 of my grandparents, for example. They all died in 1 year, a few years back. And I remember at the time just being like, how come I'm not feeling anything? I remember being there when the kid's born and nothing. I was just like, oh, that's how humans are made. It was just like this block. Then I remember we got a puppy and it all came out. It was like, like, had nothing to do with the puppy. Maybe it was the innocence of it or something. But what it suggests is those things, it's healthy, right? It's healthy to have those moments. And the humor of it coming out hand in hand with this record that I had, so casually thought, oh, fuck it, yeah, I can do this. I've done this for years. And then when it starts, I'm like, oh, it's been years since I've done this. Of course, I've been renovating or moving again and moving again. And like, but it's been years since I actually did that, right? And I recognized during Power Nerd how much of that past addiction to productivity and work was really rooted in maybe not thinking about things. It's a convenient way to not think about things. If you're always engaged and you never stop and you're never still and you're never silent, it's addictive, right? Because you're like, oh, I have to work. I can't come out. I gotta work. Sorry, I can't go to that event. I gotta work. You know, and then people close say, "Oh, Dev, you work so hard," and I'm like, "Oh, I know." And then you realize how much of that is by your own hand, right? I've got a good friend that often says to me, "Well, you do it to yourself." But in accordance to what I said earlier about I just don't know while I'm doing it. I just don't know. I wish I did. I wish I could see what I'm doing to myself, but I just have never had the wherewithal or the foresight. So I said to my friend the other day, he's like, "Well, you do it to yourself." And I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do for myself now. If I have to book everything 2 years in advance, then I'm going to say, let me do that, and then let me actually stop." And then some other friends are like, "Well, does that mean you're going to quit?" Like, man, I can't quit. This is what I do. I love music, man. I love it. But I'll tell you what happened after the Power Nerd record. It's like I got delivered two of the most beautiful guitars, three of the most beautiful guitars over the past couple of weeks that I've ever had in my life. One from Frameless, one from Aristides, one from Kiesel. Just stunning instruments, and I can't wait to make a video for it. Well, I can't wait, actually. I've got no desire to make a video, but I want to show it to you. And I didn't even plug them in, you know? I look around, I'm like, man, I got all the stuff to make these dreams of music that I've had in my head for so long a reality, and I'm just so, like, I haven't been able to see where I've landed after all these years. And hand in hand with that was Power Nerd. And if you're gonna write, I can't just write about bullshit. I can't just be like, here's a song about boy meets girl, here's a song about, you know, going to a party, there's a song about rock and roll, it's here to stay. You know, it's like, it's too much work. I just couldn't be bothered. So you have to dig in and like pull from something that you can actually relate to, or else who else is going to relate to it? And I'll tell you, having that emotional rawness that as a person I'm not familiar with, I'm not comfortable with, I'm not prepared for. And every time I hit play, I'm like, wow, what the fuck, it's so much. And then I can't find a file. Or auto backup isn't working, or, you know what I mean? Or there's missing files and we gotta, you know what I mean? It's like, and the juxtaposition between being emotionally raw, yet trying to use the other side of your brain to solve technical problems while things in your family are going fucking crazy and friends of yours are going fucking crazy. And so the name Power Nerd ended up being like quite appropriate, because although I was late, I got it done. And although it was my first time using this studio, won't be the last time, but it might be one of the last times. I wanted more. I'm like, I don't understand the studio yet. I wasn't prepared to mix. I thought somebody else was going to mix. And, you know, these aren't excuses. They're just, and I'm not making excuses for it, because it's really important to me and it's really fucking good. It's just, by the time I got to the song, it was called Goodbye, and by the time I got to that song, it just rocked me so hard. But I'm not sure if that'll translate again, because it was just more, that's what was going on in my life, right? I'm rambling here. Long story long is, for this record, what I'm saying is it's one of the most important records I've ever done, for reasons that I hope to know eventually. It's hard for me to listen to right now, because all I hear are the mistakes, and, you know, and then on the other side of it, I got these new guitars and I want to play them, but because I'm just, so much, I haven't been able to pick up a guitar or play them. And then it also makes me realize, well, what do I do? What do I do in the absence of music? Like, I've been doing that to the exclusion of everything else for so many years that in absence of it, there, I just, I was Googling the other day, what do humans do? Like, watching videos of people with hobbies, and I'm thinking, how could you care so much about that? I mean, watching somebody build model ships or trains or something, and I'm like, I have to care about it in order to invest the amount of energy in it that clearly takes. And I care about music. But what tends to happen, and this is something that has been a problem for many years, is I can talk myself into thinking that my reasons for doing things are purely based on selfishness, right? I was thinking this the other day, it's like about live performance, for example. Like, I like to play for people when the sound is good and when my voice is working and there's people there, and I think it's cool, and I think it's important in some way to have that outlet. It's like for both the audience and the performer, but it's such a different thing than it was. When I was a kid, all of us in the 80s, we see videos of the US Festival, for example. It's like 100,000 people. And those 100,000 people were there for those bands, like whatever it was, ACD, or I forget who was up, Van Halen, Motley Crue, Judas Priest, Quiet Riot. It was like 1983 or something. And then everybody took the photos where they're in front of 100,000 people, and it was like a legit thing. And I remember as kids, we were kind of raised in this, not lower middle class kind of area, and it was like, it was such an aspiration, fame and being seen and the validation of it all. And then when I finally started touring, now in Europe, for example, there's, God, it feels like 200 festivals. And each one of them has tens of thousands of people. Some of them are like Hellfest, I forget how, Rock and Ring or whatever, like 100,000 people. But there's like 700 bands on these things. And they all take the same photo. All of us do it. I've done it. Because we all grew up with that US Festival thing. You got 100,000 people behind it, and the band's like, right? And someone takes a picture from the drum kit, and we post it on our social media, and then in our mind's eyes, we're like, see? We did it. But it changed so much now. It's like a lot of these things are just days out for 100,000 people, and the 700 bands that are on the bill are just like, it's the PA. I'm saying a lot this time. I'm going to keep doing it though. And so I tend to go down these rabbit holes with live performances. Like, well, who are you doing it for? I have some friends that are under the assumption that it's, when I say to them, which I've said for many years, like, I'm conflicted about that because I don't feel like I need that validation. But I do like to play for people. And I got a buddy who's like, it's a God-given talent that we have. And it's our duty, if we have this talent, to dispense this benevolence to the world. And I think, yeah, right, man. I think we're just broken people that love having lots of people say, yay, And maybe that's me being self-deprecating. Maybe that's him being in need of that. Who knows? Plus, different strokes for different folks, right? Like, everybody's different, so maybe some people really feel that. Maybe some people feel like you're doing God's work by playing shows. And then there's the other side of it. There's people I know that are just, I see videos of them, they come up on Instagram, like some 70-year-old guy in leather pants and leather jacket and long hair and just dying to get on stage. Just like, I remember during the pandemic, it's like, I can't even live if I can't be on stage, I would read people say. These are my people. That's the thing I hear too. Or my fans. That's the other one. And I think, man, maybe I just think about this shit. Oh, I know I think about this shit too much, which is one of the things that I was trying to do with Power Nerd is not think. That's why I gave myself time limits to write it, time limits to record it. The fact that I had changed and the fatigue had caught up to me and I was burnt out, to a degree during the recording of it notwithstanding, there was really that awareness that, yeah, I do think too much about this shit. I always have. That's why I started doing meditation, even to the preschool degree that I do it. It's less about meditation and more about I think too much. So just a practice of trying to not it can't hurt, right? So maybe in the same breath I think too much about live performance. But again, that's just who I am, right? If there's anything I've come to conclusions of with this process is just because you're different than other people doesn't make that wrong, right? It doesn't mean that because other people don't think too much that it's some fundamental flaw, or because other people like the attention of, certain aspects of this and you're not as invested in it. It doesn't mean that they're suffering from some sort of childhood insecurity that I need to feel smugly aware of. It's just they're different. And I even wrote in the last couple of days of doing the Power Nerd artwork, I thought, it'd be cool to have a definition of what Power Nerd is. So I wrote a little fake dictionary definition of Power Nerd, and essentially, I can't remember it verbatim, but essentially it's like if you have a proclivity or a tendency that society has deemed a weakness, yet through perseverance and personal strength, I guess, you turn it into your superpower, whether or not that's empathy or overthinking or whatever. I think that sometimes some of us, there's some people in my life that I feel sometimes deserve congratulations just for getting out of bed. You know? So that's what I mean by Power Nerd. Like, you did it. One person's broken arms, another person's paper cut. I don't know. But recognizing who I am. A few years ago I also heard, because my internal dialogue for so many years was so toxic, right? It was always, I'm a fucking idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. Like, unconsciously. And about 5, maybe a few more years ago than that, I started trying to change that dialogue. I start by looking at myself in the mirror in the morning, and I'd say, I love you. And at first I'm like, oh, dude. But after a while, it becomes part of your internal dialogue, and it shifts it. And what I started to recognize, I think, was that there's two devs in there. There's the mystics from the Dark Crystal, and there's the skexes from the Dark Crystal, right? And I think for many years I've been trying to suppress that perceived dark side of myself. And a lot of that came from, I think, that internal dialogue of just telling myself constantly that I'm an idiot. And so by doing that, there's this sense that if I ever even acknowledge the parts of me that may have like a toxic thought or inappropriate reaction in the sphere of what is considered to be appropriate by the other side of my personality or whatever, I would just suppress it. I'd be like, you are not allowed to say anything. You're not welcome here. A few years back, I went to hypnotherapy, of all things. Not sure why, just forget who told me. It was another musician. They were just like, oh, I went to hypnotherapy and it was interesting. On a whim, I was like, oh, I'll give it a try. So I looked it up and I went. What was really interesting about it was I didn't know what it meant. You know, like when you think hypnotizing, you think of, I don't know, like a Tintin comic and they've got like a watch in front of you and you're like, oh, I'm a chicken. But what they did was they put you on this couch and they put a pair of headphones on you that are noise canceling, but they have a microphone, so all you hear is them and you're comfortable. And this lady had me lie down and then started speaking, so all I can hear, my eyes are closed, you know. She starts saying things like, you're in a forest and you hear the water and you're walking down by the water. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm not. I'm not in a forest. I don't hear the water. And I think for all the hippy-dippy shit that I tend to be so interested in and love, I thought that would work for me. I thought that I am able to visualize that. But I said to her, I said, oh, I hate to interrupt, but it's not working. I'm too analytical. I hear you say these things, but I can't suspend reality. And she said, oh, I thought you were wired like that. She said, let me try something different. And I forget exactly how she did it, but it was really interesting. She's like, okay, picture a chessboard. And on the black squares, you've got even numbers. And on the white squares, you've got odd numbers. And then every second one, swap them around. And just start these mental exercises with the intent, I believe, not being an expert, I'm only able to make assumptions. The intent is so that when you speak, when you get yourself into a frame of mind where you're not judging what comes out of your mouth, right? So you're still, of course, you're there. It's not like you're in a trance. It's not like you're not cognizant. It's just, I think it's less that you're judging what you say, because more often than not, when I say something, I think, oh, should you say this? I mean, we're all like this to some degree, I think. And I think that's not a bad thing. Otherwise, you have, like, honesty Tourette's, right? But in that state of mind, she was like, well, there's two sides of your personality that I get a sense are in conflict with each other. So I'd like to talk to the peaceful side. And she said, well, how do you feel? And it was just funny because I found myself just saying things. And I was like, oh, I'm fucking so tired. I'm just exhausted all the time. And she said, well, why? And I'd say, well, because I'm always having to fight. Always having to fight myself, right? I'm always having to fight this guy. And then she said, well, I'd like to talk to the other side. How do you feel? And I was like, you never fucking let me speak. You never let me speak. I'm like frightened all the time. I'm like hurt. And I'm never allowed to say anything because as soon as I do, it's like, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. You're a fucking idiot, right? And then through this, it's funny because, again, you're not in a trance. You just hear yourself saying this. You're thinking, yeah, but that's me. I'm frightened. I'm hurt. And then this sense of separation was really clearly observed. And at the end, just almost like a pantomime, it was posed to me, well, what would you say to yourself? What would you say to the other side of you if you had the opportunity? And I found myself saying, oh, I love you. You're me. I'm sorry you never had a voice. I'm sorry that you had to deal with that when you were young, And then the other side is like, well, where are you? And I found myself saying, all I've been trying to do is like protect you. I don't want you to be hurt. So this is my anger, my fear, all these things. they're my way of protecting us. And at the end, there was this real tangible sense of, well, we're in this together. You're all I've got and I'm all you've got. So would it not make sense, as opposed to have this internal dialogue of you're bad, be like, how do we fix this so we can, because life's not easy for anybody, right? It's just the nature of this beautiful, chaotic thing that is the earth, which is, it's so incredible, man. Like, so much of the pain that had been coming through during the Power Nerd process was so hand in hand with this overwhelming sense of gratitude. Like, oh my God, it's so incredible, the experience of it. Like, to experience these emotions and to be here. It's like, how do we live? How do we make this, how do we make the music not like a reflection of your ego? How do you make it a reflection of how do you really, really dig in? And so that process yielded this different internal dialogue that I've been trying to cultivate of, well, I love you. And when I finished this record in the Atmos, and it turned out really good, but it also didn't, it was not perfect. It's like really nice car with one square wheel. Beautiful car, one square wheel. And when it ended, I was just so, not even depressed, because I think that would imply like this kind of, that isn't the case, because I am so enamored by music and all of it. I'm just like, why can't I, why it all seems so empty and so strange and so sad, and like this change and this loss and this, it's just so sad. But for the first time ever, I was saying to myself, we're okay. I love you. You know, we're gonna do this because you're not alone. We're together. And that's what Power Nerd's about. Doesn't reinvent the wheel. I wish I could have understood the studio a bit more to make it sound a little bit more like it did in my head. But it works. And the "but it works" is not my endorsement of it. The endorsement of it for me is, this is one of the most important things that I've done. And it acts as the appetizer for this Moth trilogy. It's a celebration of what has happened in the past. And the vehicle was a bunch of rock songs. It was 10 rock songs. Got a chorus, got a verse, got a pre-chorus. But this past week of being able to sort of think about, what are you going to do in the future? A friend of mine said, again, a couple friends of mine said, what, are you going to quit? Like, and I'm like, me? I love it. I love music. I've got some of the most beautiful tools that human beings have ever produced. It's like, I can do whatever I want. I can really make this transition from being this self-deprecating character to being someone that's like, loves himself. Not in a, I'm awesome, but like, no, we're together. Of course you love me. I love my body. I love my, you know, it's like, that's what you have to do. It's like, it's absurd not to, because the preposterous nature of being here at all is just so, to not utilize that to say, oh, thanks, just seems like so, that's arrogant. But I've been going for so long, so hard, and without any sense of awareness as to why I might have been doing that. And now that I'm able to sort of see how toxic it can become if I'm not careful, if I don't think ahead, if I say yes to everything, I see how toxic and how damaging it can become. I'm not 25 anymore. I'm like in my 50s. And the last push for Power Nerd was so unhealthy for me. Like all-nighters and not eating properly and not sleeping. I mean, this shit works to a degree if you're 25 and have no peripheral awareness of why your internal mechanisms push you to compensate for a lack of self-worth by being so focused on your fucking job, right? Like, but at 52, I'm like, I'm so grateful for this Power Nerd experience because it made me go, dude, you need to sort this shit out, you know, you know, you know. But I can't do that until I stop. Not stop music, not stop writing, not stop playing, but just stop. And some people are like, oh, you know, you've got a couple of weeks. I'm like, no, I got fucking emails. I've got to deal with this. I've got to move again. It's like I can't stop. None of us can. Can you? So what it suggests to me is if that is truly what needs to happen, you need to figure out a way to make that happen. You need to figure, okay, so what is it? Money? Yeah, the cost of living in Canada is fucking insane. And I'm sure it is in UK and America and many places around the world. But it's like every time you work and you make money and it just flies out, and you make money, it flies out, and so you're always working and you're always trying to make money and you're trying to make deals and you're trying to do all these things. That's so much of what you're trying to achieve creatively, like the